All right, we can get started here, and just a reminder to folks, feel free to put your attendance in here. So as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly after. And your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. All right, so I know it's going to be a little bit quiet because it's first week right after KubeCon, and a lot of folks have taken the week off. I feel like I probably should have taken the week off, given how I feel. Not COVID, but just it's like I've had 3 different head colds over the past few weeks, and I've tested like a half dozen times or a dozen times, and every single time it's like, nope, not a COVID. Anyway, cool. So it looks like actually from an agenda perspective, don't have a lot on here, but there was a few folks who had, if we actually look at, and let me bring this up in a second, if I can just find this. Oh, actually first, Parth and I had a talk at KubeCon on Fresca, which seemed to go pretty well, I think. Right, Parth?
Yes. Yeah. I agree. It was. I think it was well received. The problem is that Fresca is very big to cover in 30 minutes, so it's a lot of topics and a lot of. So we had a lot of good questions in terms of hey, what is happening? Specifically with some of the Spire stuff and some of the work that BMitch did with the was it the Vault integration? How is that all kind of working together? What is it using for the signing and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and how is it authenticating into Vault? How is Change authenticating into Vault and all that? So I think that was very good questions around that. So I think the problem is that it's too long or too big of a topic to cover in a 30-minute talk. So I think it's definitely, that was the main issue, I think, but otherwise I think it was well received.
You got muted, Mike.
Yeah, sorry. Let me see if I can do this thing again, because for some reason I can't share my screen without everything glitching on my thing here. So let me try something. I change this to 60 Hertz. And now share my screen. Let's see if it'll go away. Yeah, okay. That seems to work. I don't know what's up, but if I change my monitor to 60 Hertz, it goes away. Oh, wait, no. It's better, but it's still weird. So a bunch of folks have been asking about a lot of different things. So one of the things that came out of some of the conversations with folks over at KubeCon was one person had asked if we could include one person asked if we can include stuff like confidential containers, and we did say that was something that we were already sort of looking at, but it's definitely something that we'll need to kind of like there's not a lot of things that support confidential containers from the hardware perspective, so it's not the easiest thing to just sort of go out and test, especially also given that it's hard to actually introspect in on a confidential container unless you're like have all the right parameters and you're saying like, yes, this should be allowed to go out and so on. That's what one person had brought up. Another person had been asking stuff, which is something that I think is worthwhile from the Salsa perspective, is Salsa is looking to try and record enough information from the build inputs to potentially be used as a rebuilder sort of manifest. And so you can imagine, hey, if somebody captures enough information at a high level of Salsa, you'll be able to verify that Salsa build by going back and doing something like converting it into a Fresca pipeline. So that's something that some folks had brought up as well. What else? Oh, I see actually a bunch of more folks joined. Does anybody who's new want to introduce themselves? And also I'll share the notes in a second.
I'll go. This is Sunny Yip. I am new to the meeting and I'm new to Kusari as well. I just joined the company yesterday. I'm looking forward to work with you guys.
Hello, my name is Prakan and everybody knows me as developer. I mostly need the meeting. Thank you.
Hey, glad to have you.
Hi, this is Furkan, and I also came here to listen you. And this is my first meeting for Frasca.
Cool, awesome. Glad to have you. And so yeah, we have a bunch of issues. Some actually opened up by developer guy over there. I think we have a bunch of different issues that I think are worthwhile also taking a look at, based on some of the stuff that's come up. Some of the stuff I think we need to have some conversations on, and it will be, I think, a bit of a broader conversation. Is some folks are asking, like, could some of the things that we're doing from a security perspective, could they be used on stuff like Azure DevOps, GitLab, GitHub CI directly, and so on? There might be certain things that folks could take out of this as a component or whatever, but we do probably want to just have like some conversations to see, like, hey, are there certain things that are large enough that maybe it makes sense for it to be pulled out of Fresca itself as being a core thing in Fresca and being its own thing that just Fresca uses and could be used by other things? That's definitely something that's worth exploring, but I do think that, like, just saying, hey, could we run this on Azure DevOps is not necessarily just like the easiest sort of thing, given that a lot of what we are doing, right, with Spiffy Spire and with all these other pieces is it does require a Kubernetes cluster configured in certain ways to do all the right things. But if folks had additional thoughts about, like, oh, here are some things that you could get like 70% of some of the nice stuff out of Fresca, or, you know, here's a way to plug in workload identities using a different mechanism, that might also be at least useful to point folks in that direction. And then also see if we can get, you know, additional contributors to maybe help out there as well. Anybody have any sort of thoughts on that? All right,
Yeah,
cool.
in general, when I think of doing this within like a GitHub Actions, I feel like we're nesting a CI system within a CI system. And so I'm thinking along the lines of, what does it make sense to possibly pull out so you're not reproducing a lot of the same functionality in two tools?
Yes. Agreed. And I think that's kind of where I can imagine, you know, especially given all the stuff that's going on with the Salsa tooling and some of these other things, like if there is a tool to sort of say, hey, here is, you know, I don't know, like, for example, I could definitely imagine that the Q stuff we are doing, some of it could be abstracted out where it generates a GitHub actions as opposed to a Fresca pipeline, or, you know, that sort of thing. But I don't necessarily think it doesn't necessarily have to be it's not necessarily a priority right now, but I think having a good answer and also being able to point people in the right direction from the architectural documents might also be helpful. It's just so that folks know, like, hey, here's what we're doing here. If folks have suggestions on how to do that in Azure DevOps, we definitely, you know, either link to it, or if there's a way that you could abstract out something we're doing, yeah, you do that.
Yeah, I had started to put some thought into this, especially with like GitHub Actions, and it ended up being a pretty tough question, a pretty tough direction to actually pull off. So if anyone did want to think about this, I'd be happy to work with them on it, or see if we can migrated over. But yeah, it basically came down to you need something like chains and a consistent like fabric to tie things together, and putting into GitHub Actions kind of deletes all that. But I'm sure there's still an answer, and we could probably come up with something. Whether or not it's practical or not is an entirely different question, but feel free to ping me if someone wants to work on it.
Cool. I will fix up that PR. Yeah, cool. So what else? A bunch of folks actually have been asking also at some of the other stuff, could we integrate with Argo CD or Flux? Some folks at KubeCon were talking about that as like a mechanism, or at least show an example of that. There's some stuff there. What else?
That might make a lot of sense for our sample pipeline where we go through and do a deploy at the end, because I feel like the way we've implemented it right now needs a dramatic change.
All right, cool.
At the same time, I'm sure people would not be excited to see yet another tool deployed by Fresca.
Well, I mean, I think with some of it, I think it's okay to, I think as we are continuing to build this out, one of the things that has been brought up a couple of times is we want to have a way of saying, here is a dev Fresca environment, and we can spin up that dev Fresca environment, which includes a bunch of different things. And that would include some of these other extra things that you might not want to, you might have something else installed, but for the examples and whatever would still be proved to be relatively useful. I know one of the things that is probably one of the big things is just how are we actually packaging up Fresca? Yeah, I know we've been sort of skirting around that problem for a while now, but I think as this becomes, I don't want to say more mature, but well, yeah, I guess it becomes more mature, and we're almost at a point where I feel like we could have a beta release of this thing. Probably we need to still fix up some of the Spiffy Spire, the Spire server issues, and we need to fix up some of the cert manager and some of the other like little things. But I think we definitely can deploy this sort of thing out, and have. And we just need to figure out what is that deployable artifact. What does that thing look like? Whether it is a Helm chart or just a bunch of YAML that is run by some sort of install script or whatever, but we need to have something there. And I know, Brendan, you're working on a way to make it easier for us to pin the dependencies.
Yeah, so that would be a side project. I've also been in the past, I went through and updated the makefile to separate out what's the developer install from what's the core of Fresca. And once you start pulling pieces out, there's not a lot left in the core itself. And so a lot of it gets into documenting how do all these things that we set up for the developer side really fit in, because it's not necessarily developer, but possibly external to the Fresca server. When you're thinking about things like the Spire server, when you think about things like a Vault server and all those integrations.
Cool. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, Brendan, I'd probably want to follow up with you on that a little bit too. We have a couple of use cases in mind where the packaging, no matter what it looks like, either for developer or more for even just production deploy, really needs a little bit of love. I'll have to show you some of the things that we've been finding in terms of what people actually would like to do in the deployment environment, and see if we can find a way maybe to package it discreetly for each set or something like that.
Yeah.
Real quick. So that's number 353, the one you were just hovering on, Mike. So I just wanted to add, I put a comment there, but basically that is going to be included as part of pipelines. So the workload registrar is actually part of the pipelines, TechCon pipelines. It will be in the future once the Spire stuff gets merged. So I think, so I mean, this kind of removes the need for adding another. We don't want to add a separate, a workload registrar, right, into Fresca, because there's no need, because it will actually be part of Tecton pipelines in the future. And what it will do is basically every time a new task run is instantiated, the Tecton pipelines controller will automatically register it with the Spire server and so forth, right? So you're not manually creating anything. I think with the use case you were mentioning here in terms of having manually put some entries in. So the only manual entries you kind of have to put in at that point is just the pipelines controller piece and Tecton chains. I think those are the only two things that need to be registered. So I think that's what we didn't implement it here, is because it'll make it a little bit more flexible. If we don't want to automatically register stuff, I think we're going to have people be able to, like, depending on their environment, be able to register and move things around as they see fit, and use different plugins and so forth, right? So I think this issue, we can talk about it more, but I think because it's part of Tecton's pipeline controller, and then it will take care of all that kind of stuff for you. Whatever needs to be automatically managed will be managed automatically, and some of the things that are manual at this piece in terms of registering those two servers, I think we should just keep manual until I think until we have like a proper, like, hey, this is the way people want to deploy it, then maybe that's worthwhile. But at this point, I think we should be a little bit more flexible.
Cool. Cool.
Thank you, Bart. Should I close this issue?
Yeah, if you think so. I mean, if you agree with my thoughts.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Since we have developer guy here, do we want to talk about the OCI one that we're looking at now?
Yep. Yeah. I don't have much of an opinion on this one, so I feel like
I was chatting in Slack on this one, so I don't want to dominate the conversation. I was trying to leave it a little bit open to get other opinions on there, but looking at what's coming down the line from the upstreams, Kyverno themselves, they've got a Helm chart, and they've got the manifest itself is just moving. So we were pulling the old location, they moved it to a new location. They're putting it in the release artifacts themselves now. So we can pull from either of those, but they're also adding an OCI location where they're just pushing it up to a registry. So that'd be a third location you get it from. If we go with the OCI location, we're going to have to start either, well, I think we could pin. So that would be one option. If we don't pin to a specific digest in there, we could also have to do some other vendoring solution off of that. But either way, we're going to have to pull it down from OCI to run it. If we kept it from the manifest, I think that's just a URL change. The Helm chart has a nice feature where then we have the values and we can start tweaking the install instead of trying to do patches on top of it. Might have some better options to configure it. So I felt like the Helm install might make sense in the long term. The thing to keep in mind for the short term is they started breaking some stuff in Kyverno for kubectl apply. Their annotation just got too large. And so you can't do a kubectl apply anymore.
Wait, what?
They have an annotation in there, and when you do a kubectl apply, it's tracking some previous states or whatever in the annotation, and the field just grows too large. And so from the latest releases, you can no longer do a kubectl apply with their build, with their manifest.
That seems like an issue.
It seems like it should be an issue. And what I'm seeing from them is they're just pushing off and just saying, no, you should just use replace. And it's like, that's not really the same.
Yeah. I was just about to say, yeah. I mean, I know you could work around it with kubectl apply, or replacing the annotations, but yeah.
So that's why I didn't go with the latest release when I was pushing the fixes that we were running into last week.
SSA might be an option. Server-side apply. Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah. So I've also been poking around with server-side apply. That helps out too, but it's
I I really hope that over on Kyverno they're looking at this, trying to figure out a better long-term solution, because it feels like we're just band-aiding it at a certain point. And
Yeah. Yeah, as far as like the Helm stuff, I think the one of our concerns has been when you start to run multiple Helm charts of multiple different systems, all like, and getting them all to sort of speak to each other in good ways is not always the easiest. I mean, granted, I haven't done a whole lot with Helm chart over the past few years, but I remember it used to be a big issue. And then like, especially if you know, it always, I don't know, maybe I'm just biased against Helm, but
I think it depends on who wrote the chart at a certain point and what configuration options they put in there,
Yeah.
whether they throw a massive database and other things in. At least it's Helm 3, not Helm 2. So we're not dealing with the tiller or whatever the other product is. So for me, it's mostly a templating, and it's a non-perfect templating engine. So there's issues with trying to write that stuff. But if someone's already
Yeah.
written it, and they have it, and they've got all the configurations for us,
Yeah.
sometimes that can be a lot easier.
Yeah. And I think also when it comes to how we want to deploy, when we want to deploy Fresca itself, how do we want, like, do we want to make that a Helm chart? Do we want to, yeah. Oh, also, one other thing, since I forgot to mention this. So I'll also be giving a talk on Fresca in Japan next month, at the Open Source Summit Japan. So if there's things that folks want me to highlight, can definitely highlight. It seems like one of the big things that people have expressed interest on over there is big auto industry. And so a lot of folks out there are interested in like, hey, secure builds that are not like, you know, a lockdown Jenkins. Cool. Also, so I have some changes that aren't fully finished yet, of showing off also. Actually, are there any other sort of issues folks wanted to bring up?
Real quick, for 351, my Brad opened a draft PR. Why is that in draft? Seems like it's failing, looks like.
Does
Sure.
tech
there's-
pipelines?
Yeah, there was some issue initially with the version of dashboard didn't support the newer version of the long-term release of
I think we can get
pipelines.
rid of, you don't need dashboard actually. It's
Well,
not
yeah,
used.
but
It's not used
I
at all.
I updated it to the LTS version of pipeline or of dashboard that came out, and then there's still some issue with it deploying completely. So I haven't been able to track down what that is yet. So I just sort of left it there failing, just as a note that we tried
So,
it.
I mean,
but
if it's
seem to be
causing
working.
issues, I think we can just get rid of Tectone dashboard. Right? It's literally not used for anything. For
Yeah,
any
but
of the demos or anything.
Yeah, I can try that, but I have a feeling that it might not be completely dashboard that's the problem now.
So what's the issue with pipelines? I'm sorry, like it won't install, or is it?
It doesn't completely come up during the setup Fresca.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's waiting for a rollout to complete that never completes, and then it times out and dies. So, like I said, I haven't had time to really dig into it to figure out what it is. I'll try it today without dashboard and see if that makes a difference.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Cool. All right. Looks like most of the other issues are we need better documentation for some things. Some of the folks from in Toto were asking if if there's any work that could be done to merge in something like in Toto layouts into some of what we're doing. They seem to be willing to give us dev cycles on that. If we kind of like walk them through what we're kind of trying to do with Tecton and all that.
I mean, that would be interesting. I think we talked about that before. It seems like it was kind of hard to create a layout without knowing what the final end product would be or what the steps would be, right? I think that was the whole problem.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if we did create a layout, right? If you had something like a, I think the thought process was if you had like Tecton change or something, create a layout for us. Is it really buying us anything? Because at the end of the day, it's checking itself, right? It created a layout that it's verifying, so it's kind of pointless.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the idea here is more, and from my understanding, talking to Justin Kapos, was, yeah, the layout was never intended to be as like strict as it is now, where the idea was it was supposed to be more like a policy, right? Where it's like you should be like the output of this step should be the input of this step, not like a literal kind of like you must, you know, follow exactly these things. So there was some stuff there. And then the idea was also potentially to allow for inference where you can infer what the layout would be and then go back and be able to recheck, right? So you could go back, at least one of the ideas was you could go back and generate a layout and then rerun the build against that layout to then say, hey, is it like if I rerun this build, does it rerun all the same steps?
But then what if your build is wrong the first time through, right? How do you trust that piece?
Well, yeah. So the idea here is it more for a verification piece, as in, is the hardware, that's like for if the hardware is compromised, right? Like, yeah, it reported that it ran these steps. Okay, cool. Let me run these steps somewhere else. Oh, hey, this is weird. It's doing something. It seems to be doing something completely different than that artifact it originally produced.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if it's like two different build systems, right? Then okay, that makes sense. But if it's the same one, I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah.
At some point, you need a check in there that says make sure the inputs really were the inputs we wanted, and that gets hard to generate. Yeah,
I'm thinking that might, you know, like that could be done within Tecton pipelines itself, right? You know, we are already signing the results, so could we sign the actual, you know, to double check as they're moving between tasks, right? Is that still valid? You know, like to check to see the signatures are still valid between the results as they're being passed between the different tasks. That could be done over there. I think a lot easily than, you know, that they may try to incorporate it within Fresca somehow with like with layouts or something.
Yeah, so I think there's value in talking with the Intoto people to see what their thoughts on
definitely
the value of having the layout and whether there's something that we're missing there, right?
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So I think if they're open to talking with us, I think that's definitely a great path forward.
Sure. Yeah. They seemed interested in that. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like the ideal is if you have something like the queue that's building the whole pipeline also generates the layout at that point. And so you do it one time up front, not per individual pipeline run.
Yes. That's kind of where I was talking with them as well, is I think some of them have some blind spots, just given that most of the folks in the Intoto side are very much in the academic space. So they're not familiar with all the other tools that are doing similar sorts of things. And so the idea here would just be, hey, look, we want to be able to say, like the thing that I made sure got across was it's more that we view layout as a policy than necessarily like, you know, a hard coded script, you know what I mean? Like of you should be doing this, this, and this, and then signing it with this. And then it should be more like it should be doing this step. And then the output of this step should be going into the input of this step, and should be also abstract enough where like one of the ideas, right, was one of the things that was being discussed was like, yeah, you could run that through something like, you can run it locally for testing purposes against certain things. You could run it in, you know, you could run it in GitHub Actions. You could run it, you know, like the idea would be that it's agnostic to the actual build system. And in fact, could allow certain things, especially when it comes to like high level policy, like you should have this sign off, or you should have this asynchronous thing eventually, right? That sort of thing, that where certain pieces wouldn't necessarily fit into Fresca directly, right? Because you can imagine long running tests that take 24 or 48 hours. You're not going to have Fresca wait for those 48 hours, but you might have whatever process that's doing that sign a thing that would be part of a layout. And then you would be able to go back and say, yep, my layout is now, you know, I now have all the either link metadata and whatever. Does that make sense? All right, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think that's, I mean, I don't know if folks have other things they wanted to. Oh, one thing for Brad. So we spoke to the Q folks at KubeCon. A few of them were actually over there, like Paul. Yep. And they wanted to chat with you more about Q and what they could be doing to make Q better and make Q nicer to use. And since you're the person who I think has written the most Q on the Fresca project, they seemed really interested in chatting with you about like what, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I did notice they had the Fresca logo on the last community call at the end, where they're showing the people that are using Q. So the Fresca
yeah, I think
logo was there.
Oh, cool. Well, when was that call?
A week ago, I think.
Oh, cool.
On Tuesday.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's up on YouTube.
Maybe it was a week before that.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. That's awesome to know that folks know that we're using cool tech.
Yeah. I'm not sure they made the connection between Fresca was SSF, because Paul and what's his name had come and done a talk for us when it was SSF, right?
Yeah. I did bring up that to him when we were at KubeCon, and he's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I brought up that like they're looking at, which will also make our lives, I think, a little bit easier, is they're looking at the difference between hermetic Q runs and non-hermetic Q runs. So like the idea would be, in most cases, Q runs are going to be hermetic, because anything also in the standard API should be hermetic. So stuff like, there's still the open issue where he's like, yeah, we're working on it, which is including like URI matching, because like that's one of the things that we want to be able to do is match on URIs, and pretty much know like, hey, this thing that somebody gave me, it should be a URI, and also be able to do stuff like, hey, it should be a URI, and these should be the, like, I'm expecting these to be elements in that URI, as opposed to having to do nasty regular expressions. So that's one big thing, is adding a bunch more stuff into the standard API. The other thing he was saying that they're looking at is ways to discern between sort of like non-hermetic, as in like you have stuff in this queue that is going to call out to some other random, I don't know, piece of code, and we cannot, like, we have no idea what's going on there. So we can't necessarily like guarantee hermeticity throughout the whole thing, that that piece of code doesn't reach out to the internet or something. But we can say whatever it pulls down, now we know that it doesn't call out to, so there's a bunch of stuff there that folks are talking about and doing.
Cool.
What else did they bring up? They brought up that they're totally redoing the documentation on the website. They also said if there's things that we could, contribute from like hey, here's a nice little example of how to do a thing. It would be really useful for them, because I think they're looking for stuff like, oh, here's how we deploy to here's how we deploy to here's how we deploy some of this stuff. Just here's how you deploy, let's say, Kubernetes using Q in a way where you get like, type, essentially type checking, that sort of thing.
I feel like they're looking for features. The one that I would like the most is, well, they've covered two areas. They've covered generating a Kubernetes manifest, and they've covered the verifying an existing Kubernetes manifest. I'd love to see them go to the other side and extend an existing Kubernetes manifest. So take something that came from upstream and add on your own values, make sure that it's got certain fields in there. Be a nice feature if they could add something like that.
Yeah.
Take the upstream as your default values for everything.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can do that somewhat. I mean, Fresca sort of has that. If you have a YAML file sitting in the current directory, it'll actually load that into Q, right? And so you can augment that once it's read in. So, I mean, you can sort of do that today if you take the YAML file, read it in, and then have it available.
Does it read it in as defaults, or does it read it in as final values?
There is no different. Well, there is a difference, but it reads it as final values, right?
Yeah. That's where I'm trying to figure out how to take that and then extend that and say, okay, let's add an extra entry into this array to do another volume mount or whatever you're doing.
Well, there's work going on to provide some more flexibility with arrays, so you can extend the arrays rather than having them be hardened like they currently are.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I mean, it's not, what you're talking about isn't really extending, it's more like overriding what's in the YAML file, right?
Some of that is.
Cool. So yeah, is there anything else folks wanted to bring up? That was most of the stuff from this, from my end of the agenda.
I think we need to take a closer look at the pipeline attestations still, right? I think now that KubeCon and everything is over, I will spend some time to see how what that generates. I know the config source is being added into, so it was missing config source in the self attestation. So that is being fixed upstream on pipelines. So that should be captured by chains. I gotta check the status of that PR. It might be done, but so I
Is
think
any of that released yet?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's.
Okay.
I'll double check the PRs to see what the milestones and stuff for that was. What the release was for that. But I can but I know it's in the works, so I think it'll fix a lot of the issues we were having. You know, pipeline managed stations it's something huge for Fresca. At the same time, getting the config source, you know, getting valid getting valid salsa coming out of chains is definitely needed. I think it's not capturing materials properly either.
Yeah, there's a bunch of hinting you can do, but that involves changing a lot of the tasks and,
Yeah.
you know, passing that information along with some hints, which is not
Yep.
ideal.
Right. So there's definitely some cleanup that needs to be done. So we'll see. But yeah, I can help out. I can take a look at some of those things probably later this week or next week. That's all I had. Thanks.
Okay, cool. If that's it, we can call it 15 minutes early and see you all in 2 weeks.
Cool.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Cheers.
Later.